My fiancé accidentally sent me a voice note meant for someone else. It started with, "Last night with you was better than with him." I stood there in the kitchen with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering like I could rewind time by not pressing play again. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the rain tapping the window. It was one of those ordinary Tuesday nights where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. We were 8 weeks out from the wedding. I'd been looking at seating charts on my lunch break. I'd been arguing with my mom about whether we needed a second photographer. I'd been proud of myself for getting my credit score up so we could refinance after we got married. Normal grown-up stuff. And then a voice note slid into my messages like a blade. At first, my brain tried to protect me. Maybe it was meant for her best friend. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she meant him as in some character in a podcast. Maybe last night was about a show. Maybe my phone was glitching. Maybe I'd finally cracked from stress. Then the note kept going. Not graphic, not explicit, worse than that. Casual. Familiar. The kind of familiarity that only comes from skin-close secrets and repetition. She didn't sound guilty. She sounded satisfied. Like she was narrating something she deserved. I listened 3 times, because denial is just hope wearing a cheap costume. Her name was Sophie. She was 29, organized, the kind of person who kept color-coded folders for everything. When we met 2 years earlier at a friend's backyard barbecue in Phoenix, she'd told me she hated drama. She'd said she wanted peace. She'd said she was tired of games. I believed her because I wanted to. We didn't move in together right away. She was working as a travel nurse, bouncing between hospitals. I was in logistics for a regional shipping company. We did the long-distance thing for months, airport goodbyes, late-night calls, calendars synced like a promise. When she finally took a contract in my city, we made it official. We found a place, signed a lease, told everyone we were done waiting. But there had always been one detail I never loved. The second bedroom. Sophie called it her quiet room. Sometimes she slept in there when she had night shifts and didn't want to wake me. Sometimes she took calls in there. Sometimes she said she needed space to decompress after brutal days at work. I tried to be the supportive fiancé who didn't make everything about himself. I didn't like it, but I didn't fight it. Now, holding that voice note, my mind replayed every closed door like it had been locked from the inside on purpose. I heard the shower start down the hall. She was home. She'd been in the bathroom the whole time. The message had come in while she was 10 feet away, steam rising, humming like life was normal. I walked to the hallway slowly, like sudden movements might set off an alarm. Her phone was on the entryway table where she always dropped it. She was a creature of habits. The screen lit when I got close, showing her lock screen photo, the 2 of us at Sedona, sunburned and grinning, her hand on my chest like she belonged there. My message app was still open on my phone. Same number. Same contact name. Same voice. I stood there long enough that my legs started to ache. I didn't burst into the bathroom. I didn't pound on the door. I didn't do any of the things you see in videos where a guy loses control and becomes a headline. I did what I always do when something doesn't make sense. I collected information. I walked into the second bedroom and looked around in a way I never had. Not just seeing furniture, but noticing patterns. The bed was made with military corners. A small white noise machine sat on the nightstand. There was a desk with a laptop docked, the screen down. A basket of chargers. A stack of mail I assumed was junk. I picked up the mail. It wasn't junk. 2 envelopes had her name, but the last name on them wasn't mine to be. It wasn't her maiden name either. It was a different last name entirely. My stomach did a slow, heavy drop, like an elevator whose cables had just decided they were done. I set the envelopes down like they might bite. The shower stopped. Water dripped in the bathroom sink. A drawer opened. A towel rustled. I stared at the laptop on the desk, then at her phone on the entryway table, then at my own phone in my hand, still showing her message. My thoughts weren't dramatic. They were practical. Mean in their simplicity. Who is he? How long? And why did she say him like he's the default? I heard her bedroom door open. Her footsteps padded down the hallway. I didn't have time to build a speech. I didn't have time to practice calm. I didn't even have time to pretend I didn't know. So I did the only thing I could do without giving myself away. I hit play again. And I watched her face change in the doorway when she realized what I was listening to. That was the first time I saw fear on Sophie. Not regret. Not sadness. Fear, like someone whose 2 lives had just collided. And before she could say anything, her phone buzzed on the entryway table. A new voice note came in. From the same conversation. Same sender. And the preview line on my screen showed the first few words before I even opened it. He's starting to suspect. I didn't confront her right then. Not because I was noble. Because I didn't trust myself to stay smart once the emotions caught up. Sophie stepped into the second bedroom like she owned it, towel still damp around her hair, eyes locked on my phone. Her expression did that quick shifting thing people do when they're searching for the correct mask. Concern. Confusion. Offended. Injured. I kept my face still. It felt like holding a heavy door shut with my shoulder. She tried to take my phone. I moved it away. She tried to explain without explaining. Her hands moved like she could sculpt a new reality out of air. Her mouth formed half sentences that sounded like excuses before they even landed. I gave her nothing back. I walked past her, down the hall, and out the front door. The rain hit my forehead like a cold slap. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing. The voice notes were still on my phone, like a poisonous gift I couldn't throw away. I played the second one. It wasn't long. It wasn't detailed. It was strategic. She was talking to someone who knew about me. Someone involved enough to have a stake in keeping me calm. She mentioned timing. She mentioned the date. She mentioned the money already being set aside. And then she said something that made my throat go tight. She said my first name the way someone says a problem they're managing. Not the way a fiancé says it. I drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in a corner booth where no one could see my screen. I wrote down facts instead of feelings. Sophie. Different last name on mail. Voice note meant for someone else. Mention of money. Mention of a date. Someone else worried I might suspect. I opened our shared calendar. Wedding-related entries were all there. Vendor calls, fittings, deposits. But I noticed something new now that I looked with different eyes, blank blocks she'd always labeled as shift or rest. I checked the next 2 weekends. She had a conference in Las Vegas 3 weeks before the wedding. She'd told me it was optional but good for networking. She'd said her hospital might reimburse it. She'd asked if I minded her going alone. I had minded, a little. I hadn't wanted to be that guy. I pulled up her email on the laptop at home later that night while she was out. Not hacked. Not password cracked. She'd saved her login on that laptop in the second bedroom, the one I wasn't supposed to touch. I told myself that if she wanted privacy she shouldn't have built a secret life on autofill. What I found wasn't one affair. It was infrastructure. 2 inboxes. 2 sets of confirmations. 2 separate wedding-related emails, one under her usual name, and another under that unfamiliar last name from the envelopes. The other inbox had messages about tux fittings, a venue tour, and a guest list that didn't include me. It included a man named Derek. There were heart emojis. There were "can't wait" lines. There were logistics about the same month. Same season. Same year. Different city. My hands went numb. I searched the other inbox for ring. There were photos attached. Not explicit, just hands and jewelry and smiles. Her hand. A ring I'd never seen. A ring on her finger that wasn't mine. I sat back in the desk chair and stared at the wall like it was going to offer me a translation. The voice note started to make sense in a way that was almost worse. Last night with you was better than with him. It wasn't a confession of cheating on me. It was her telling someone else that sleeping with me was better than sleeping with him. Which meant I wasn't the main story. I was a chapter she thought she could keep hidden. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I started taking screenshots. Every email. Every confirmation. Every name. Every payment receipt. Because the minute I confronted her, she'd pivot. She'd delete. She'd rewrite history. She'd call me paranoid. And I had one more ugly realization: our finances. We had a joint savings account for the wedding. We'd been depositing money every payday. She handled the payments because she was better with details. I believed that, too. I logged into the account. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize. Not huge enough to trigger alarms. Small, steady, like a leak you don't notice until the floor collapses. I pulled the statements and matched the timing. The withdrawals aligned with receipts in the other inbox. Derek's tux. Derek's venue deposit. Derek's flight. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being used to fund a wedding I wasn't invited to. I sat there in that quiet room she claimed she needed for peace, and I realized something else: Sophie hadn't been afraid that I'd be hurt. She'd been afraid I'd find out before she was done. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie, short and careful, asking where I was, saying we needed to talk. Then another notification, an Instagram follow request from a private account with no profile picture. The username was just a first name and a number. Derek_417. I accepted before I could talk myself out of it. A message came in immediately. Not long. Not dramatic. Just a single line that made my skin turn cold. He said he thought Sophie was his fiancée. And he asked me who the hell I was. I didn't answer Derek right away. I needed to make sure I wasn't walking into a trap. So I did what people do when their reality breaks: I verified every piece. I searched the unfamiliar last name from the mail. It was real. Sophie had used it for at least 2 years ago in a city 3 states away. I found it tied to an old address and a public record that showed a name change request that had been filed and then withdrawn. I searched Derek. He was real too, linked to a mid-size construction company, featured in a local 40 under 40 article. The type of guy who looked stable in photos. The type of guy Sophie would choose if she was building a plan. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I made a new email address with a neutral name and wrote Derek back with one sentence. I wasn't going to fight him, and I wasn't going to warn Sophie. He responded with a phone number and a request to meet in public. We chose a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. Midday. Lots of people. Cameras on the ceiling. The kind of place where nobody could get loud without everyone seeing. Derek arrived first. He sat facing the entrance. When I walked in, his eyes tracked me like he was measuring whether I looked like a threat or a mistake. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He looked like me in a different life, tired, trying to hold it together, with that stiff posture people get when they're forcing themselves not to explode. We didn't shake hands. We sat. And the strangest thing happened, the anger I'd been carrying didn't know where to go, because the person across from me wasn't the enemy. He slid his phone across the table. Photos of him and Sophie. Holidays. A family dinner. Engagement selfies. A save-the-date draft. He showed me a ring receipt. Then he said, without drama, that Sophie had told him she used to date a guy named Jordan years ago, but it ended, and he was unstable. She'd said I might try to interfere because I was still obsessed. She'd said if a stranger reached out claiming to be her fiancé, it would be a lie. He didn't need to say the rest. She'd pre-poisoned the well. She'd put a story in place so he'd doubt me if the truth ever surfaced. I pulled out my phone and showed him the voice note. I showed him the shared bank withdrawals. I showed him the other inbox. His jaw tightened, and his eyes did this blank thing like his brain was trying to slow the pain down so it wouldn't kill him all at once. Then he did what I wasn't expecting. He apologized. Not for Sophie. For himself. He said he'd been about to come into that coffee shop ready to blame me, because that was easier than accepting she'd played him. I understood that. Too well. We talked like two people comparing maps after realizing they'd been walking in circles. Sophie had kept us separated by geography and scheduling. When she was with me, she said she had travel shifts and training. When she was with him, she said she had family obligations and work weekends. Her quiet room suddenly made sense. It wasn't for decompression. It was for coordination. I asked Derek if he'd ever noticed gaps, times she went silent, times she fell asleep early but didn't respond until morning. He said yes, but she always had a clean explanation. He asked the same of me. I realized how many times I'd accepted an excuse because it came wrapped in a calm voice and a plausible story. Then Derek said something that shifted the entire conversation. He said Sophie had been pushing him to put the house in her name after the wedding. She'd been insistent about combining assets quickly. She'd been talking about quitting her job and starting a business. She'd asked him to add her to his company's insurance and payroll for tax reasons. It wasn't just romance. It was a strategy. And then he told me the part that made my blood go cold. He said he'd found a folder on her laptop labeled with my name. Not pictures. Not memories. Documents. A scanned copy of my driver's license. My social security card. A credit application draft. She had everything she'd need to open accounts in my name. I sat back, and suddenly the small leaks in our joint savings account weren't the scariest thing. The scariest thing was how calmly she'd been building a life raft out of other people's identities. We decided not to warn her. We decided to move like adults, not like characters. Derek contacted a lawyer. I froze my credit and pulled a full report. Derek checked his accounts and found a new credit card inquiry he hadn't authorized, filed 2 weeks earlier, tied to an address neither of us recognized. We weren't dealing with a messy fiancé. We were dealing with someone who had done this before. The wow factor wasn't some dramatic hidden lover. It was that Sophie didn't just betray people. She ran them. Derek suggested we set a trap, a clean one. Sophie had a bridal shower scheduled that weekend. Both sides of her life were going to be represented there, her friends, her coworkers, even some of Derek's family who were flying in. If we chose that moment, we wouldn't need to shout. We wouldn't need to get physical. We'd just need the truth in the room, with nowhere for it to hide. I didn't like the idea of public humiliation. Then I remembered how she'd stolen my future in small, quiet withdrawals. I remembered that voice note, how relaxed she sounded. And I realized shame was the only language she hadn't already weaponized. So we planned it. Not to be cruel. To be final. The night before the shower, Sophie texted me again, still calm, still careful, asking me to come home and talk like adults. I told her I would. And then, as I drove toward our apartment, I saw her car parked outside a hotel across town. The same hotel Derek's family had booked for the weekend. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Because at that moment, I understood the timeline. She wasn't choosing between us. She was trying to manage both of us until she could cash out. And the next morning, I was going to walk into a room full of people who thought they were celebrating love. And watch Sophie realize she'd finally run out of doors to close. The bridal shower was held in a bright rented event space with string lights and a balloon arch that spelled out Sophie in metallic gold. There were cupcakes with tiny sugar rings on top. A gift table that looked like an ad for domestic bliss. Sophie moved through the room like she was hosting her own victory lap, hugging, smiling, laughing at the right moments, pretending her life was simple. I arrived alone, dressed like I belonged there. Because I did. At least, I was supposed to. Derek arrived 20 minutes later with a small wrapped box, playing the role of the devoted fiancé. His face was controlled in a way that told me he'd rehearsed not losing it. Sophie didn't see him at first. When she did, her smile faltered, not enough for everyone, just enough for me and him to notice. Her eyes flicked to me. Then to him. Then back. For a second, she looked like someone who'd stepped onto ice and heard it crack. She recovered fast. She always recovered fast. She approached Derek first, like her body had decided he was the bigger emergency. She tried to guide him toward the side of the room where people wouldn't see. Her hand touched his arm like she could steer the situation with fingertips. He didn't follow. He stayed in the open. So did I. Sophie's friends were busy filming little moments. Someone was live posting stories. Her aunt asked me to help carry a gift bag. A coworker complimented Sophie's dress. A cousin joked about wedding nerves. It was surreal, being inside a celebration built on a lie, watching the lie sweat. We didn't announce anything. We didn't call her out. We let the moment assemble itself. Derek's mother approached Sophie and asked if she'd met Sophie's fiancé from out of town yet. The word fiancé landed in the room like a dropped plate. Sophie's mother turned, confused, looking between Derek and me. Sophie laughed too loudly, trying to smooth it over. Her voice did that bright, fake thing people do when they want to bulldoze reality. Derek didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. He just asked, plainly, how many people in the room believed they were here for the same wedding. Sophie's face changed. Not into tears. Into calculation. She tried to separate us. She tried to pull Derek aside. She tried to tell her mother something quietly. She tried to regain control of the narrative. But the room had already started asking questions out loud. When people get confused in groups, the confusion spreads faster than any explanation. And Sophie was outnumbered by the truth. I took out my phone and played the voice note, not at full volume, not for drama, just enough for the people closest to hear the line that started all of this. The line that split the room into before and after. Sophie's best friend looked like she'd been slapped. Her mother went pale. Derek's sister took a step back like she'd suddenly realized she'd been standing next to a fire. Sophie tried to speak. She tried to say it wasn't what it sounded like. But the problem with a voice note is that it's not an accusation. It's a record. Derek opened his own phone and showed the emails, venue, vendors, a wedding date. He didn't need to explain much. The receipts spoke in the boring language of confirmation numbers and deposits. Then I showed the bank withdrawals. That's when the emotion finally cracked through the room. Not just betrayal, fear. Because people weren't only realizing Sophie had lied about love. They were realizing she'd been lying about money. Sophie's eyes darted like she was searching for an exit. She found one, anger. She tried to turn it on us, tried to make it about jealousy, tried to make it about two men fighting over her. She tried to frame herself as overwhelmed, misunderstood, trapped. It didn't work. Because Derek's lawyer had already been contacted. Because my credit was already frozen. Because Derek had already changed locks and canceled access. Because the vendors had been called that morning by Derek's attorney, warning them that disputed funds were involved. The party didn't explode into screaming. It collapsed into silence. The kind of silence where everyone realizes they've been manipulated and they're ashamed they didn't see it. Sophie left. Not escorted. Not dragged. Just walked out fast, head down, phone pressed to her ear, as if she could call her way into another version of reality. Later that day, Derek filed a police report for identity and credit fraud. I filed one too, because the folder with my documents wasn't an accident. It was a plan. Within a week, we learned the twist that made everything feel even colder. Sophie had done something similar before in another state. Not a crime record that was easy to find, more like a trail of civil disputes, broken leases, and complaints that never became charges because the victims were embarrassed and wanted it to go away. She counted on people wanting privacy more than justice. This time, she picked the wrong two men. The ending wasn't dramatic in the way stories online promise. There was no movie-style confrontation where she sobbed and confessed. There was paperwork. Calls. Long nights. A lot of anger that had nowhere to go. But the satisfaction came in a quieter way. I didn't marry her. I didn't pay for her other wedding. She didn't get my name, my credit, my future. Derek didn't lose his house. And Sophie, who had been so good at locking doors, found out what happens when two separate lives finally meet in the same room. Months later, I still had the voice note saved in a folder I never opened. Not because I needed pain. Because I needed proof that I hadn't imagined it. Because for a while, I worried that if I hadn't heard that line, I would have walked down an aisle smiling, while she smiled back, already planning her exit. And the scariest part is how close she came.